Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojú
Ashen Forge.
Hello, and welcome to the Ashen Forge 100th episode. I am Phantom X, joined by my colleagues, as always, Diggs and the legendary Neurotoxin, and we are joined by a fourth very special guest, Steven Sharif, the creative director of Ashes of Creation. Hello, Steven.
Hello, guys. Thank you for having me. I cannot believe that we are here for a third interview after nearly 6 years since our first.
Yes.
Where does the time go?
I don't know. You know, not too long ago, we actually had someone post in Discord a picture of us three when we first started doing this to us three now, and it was almost sad to see because we aged. But
oh my god, I feel
what are you talking about? I cut my beard and everything. Now I look even younger.
I feel like sometimes you see those before and after pictures of like the president. You see Obama when he first got in and then he left. I feel like to a degree, I look back sometimes at those interviews and I see myself today and I'm just like, wow, I really aged rapidly. what was happening that caused that?
Uh-huh. You're over 30. That's what happened.
I know. Actually, I turned 38 years old yesterday.
Right.
Yikes.
Yep.
Yikes.
Let's see, get to 40.
I feel like
there
I'm
you go.
60 or 70.
As we wanted to say happy birthday, Stephen. I think everybody that is watching has probably said that at some point. And
yes, I was reading through all the messages on the Twitter. I didn't know that that the community team was going to put out a tweet. And when I read the tweet yesterday morning, it said, "Today is our creative director's birthday. Wish him a happy birthday." All I could think in my mind was, please clap. Please clap. I wanted to post that.
For those of you who are new to us, we generally are conversational more than just straight question after question. And that's been on all of our past two interviews with Steven as well. So we do have a list of questions, and we thank everyone that joined. We posted this everywhere and had, I think, 140 questions at the end of the day. And we obviously don't have time for 140 questions. So apologies if you do not hear your question, but we hopefully we'll make this useful and fun. So always feel free to chat or give us feedback in the chat as well. So that being said, I'm going to make sure everything's working. And Diggs, I think you wanted to start us off. So
nice.
I have the most important question: the elephant in the room.
Ooh, I love elephants. By the way, I collect elephants. I don't know if you know that.
There you go.
Oh,
and
nice.
And ducks.
When is Nodes 3?
Nodes 3. Oh my goodness. That is a hotly contested question. So, I mean, as you guys know, as everyone knows who's probably watching, the Nodes 3 is in reference to, we had a Nodes 1 and 2 that released back in 2017. There was supposed to be a 4-part series that kind of went over the systems and mechanics of nodes and kind of gave visual representation of that in game. I made a decision back. We were at a PAX sometime and we were like working on Nodes 3. And I made a call that we would punt that series conclusion until we were closer to launch, likely Alpha 2. Next month, or excuse me, not next month, this month. Oh my God, it's July. This month, we are planning to have a node presentation. Some might call it Nodes 3. I don't personally. I intend, I think when we are closer to launch, to revisit that whole idea of a series about nodes, because it is the primary like differentiating mechanic of Ashes of Creation as an MMORPG. And I think it's important to make sure that we convey what the intent is behind the system, why it makes Ashes of Creation feel fundamentally different than the MMOs that we've all played before. And I want that to be something that's really representative of the game when it will be at launch. So I think that 4-part series is going to be redone entirely, Nodes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and be done prior to launch, probably, I would say, around like 6 months to 4 months out from launch. But we are going to be giving a Nodes update with either within this month. There's a small chance it might be next month, but it's likely going to be this month. And that's going to go over a lot of the systems and mechanics that have been revamped in preparation for Alpha 2. We're going to we're going to show some interesting things there. So it's not quite Nodes 3, but it is going to be a major I think it's going to be at least over an hour long presentation of nodes.
So technically, part of what I consider Nodes 3 is the third Know Your Nodes article that we've been waiting for 3 years, I think. I think that went out in 2019, maybe. So I've asked you several times in the last couple of years if we're going to get that third article. And it's been, we're changing stuff. Are we going to get updates to those two articles? And might we get articles at least for all 4 of the node types?
I cannot promise that that's going to be done in any short term, but I can say that prior to our launch, we will absolutely have corresponding articles that kind of revamp the knowledge base around the intent and systems and mechanics for nodes. Some of that stuff, as you would come to expect through open and active development, has changed and will continue to change based off of iterative testing benchmarks that we hit. But I can't give any short promises near future about those articles.
So that sounds like even you're going to wait until more like beta to do something like that.
Yeah, it's possible.
And what about your article series in general? We were hoping that we would be seeing, articles every few months.
I just reviewed a freeholds article that was intended to go out this last week. I pushed that to the end of this upcoming week because I was, I actively watch kind of the conversation, the posts, the Reddits, the Discord, what happens after a live stream, especially one that's as informationally intensive as this last one was. And it spurs a lot of interesting conversations, and it spurs a lot of, thoughts about how certain systems can be approached and whatnot. And as I read those, and as our community team reads those, I want to make sure we hit certain points in the articles, because it's one thing when you're doing a video presentation, when you're kind of showing off and talking actively about something on a Twitch stream. It's another thing when when ink to paper occurs, when ink to paper occurs and you release an article that's informationally driven. So I want to be able to try to include some of those topics that I've seen over the course of the last week since our last live stream in that article, and that's why I pushed it to this next week. So you'll be seeing an article come out on freeholds that goes into a little bit more depth on some of these systems, addresses some of the questions that the community's had over the course of the last week, and also clarifies some misinterpretations of the stream.
Great. Go for it, Nero.
All right. Well, not that this exactly dovetails into talking about the node system, but I would imagine he's going to have a little something to say about it. I can kind of consolidated this question down into a smaller one so you can just kind of take the floor with it.
Okay, bite-sized questions. That's cool.
How much do you hope, plan, or otherwise expect design decisions to be changed now that Bill Trost has joined the team?
Oh, good question. Interesting question. Well, first of all, Bill has, as many of you who have played EverQuest or, kind of experienced Bill's masterwork as a designer and in helping to form the actual genre that we have today as MMOs. He has incredible insight that's been built on his experience and knowledge and being a part of our community, our mmorpg genre community for a long time. My hope is always that our design team, and now with Bill's inclusion, has an opportunity to reflect on the playtesting that we're seeing internally, on the playtesting that we're doing externally with our playtesters. Excuse me. And as Bill is kind of catching up to speed on our internal documentation around these GDDs and implementation, that conversations that are stimulating and iterative will be formed around the team on some of these systems. So how much do I hope that takes place? I always hope that takes place, not just for Bill, but for our design team as a whole. Because when you're building a world and a game that is as interconnected And as intricate and detail oriented as Ashes is, or as MMOs tend to be, because as we all know, MMOs are really many games put into one. And there's a major opportunity that when you do that type of approach, things can feel discombobulated, they can feel not connected, they can feel arbitrary if it's not done right. And because of that, I think a certain high degree of introspection and what we're building is necessary, and that means a lot of conversations have to be had, and those conversations need to be had sometimes repeatedly over the course of time, because these systems influence each other, they inform each other, and as one continues to get fleshed out or gets implemented, it might impact previous decisions that we've made around how certain other systems interact. And that is just a constant process that occurs within the development. And so, anytime a development team or a design team wants to try to create these golden frameworks that just can't be touched, that's a recipe for disaster. And I think that you have to be kind of loose and willing to make changes as necessary as these things get more informed, and that's a very healthy place to be for a design team.
Sounds good. That definitely makes sense, to be flexible with all of the designs, not to ever be married. And this is something that I've seen happen a lot in, both on teams that I've been on and observing projects from the outside, getting so married to a specific idea and a specific mentality that, like, this is our design pillar, this is our golden blah blah blah, and it's like, it releases and it does poorly. It's like, what happened? Well, your design pillar was crap. We told you here's what needed to be done, this is why it was holding you back from everything else, and you guys blew it.
I think it's important to note that there is a differentiation, in my opinion, between what is meant to represent the philosophy, the goal, the pillar of the design, and how you're trying to adhere to those goals with systems design or with mechanics. But when you get married to the system or the mechanics of part of it, that's the recipe for disaster. Staying true to the identity and intent of the game, that's a good thing. I agree with that. That's where you do want to live, right? And you negotiate sometimes between how those systems might interact, again, because MMOs are so broad and diverse, and the types of loops they're presenting to the player, many in one. And sometimes that can create conflict, that can create discussion. But those things are good because you're getting perspectives that represent an eclectic user group. Because MMORPGs, especially the wider the game's intent, you get a more eclectic audience, and that means that they have separating interests, and sometimes those interests can overlap and they can conflict. So it's not a bad thing to kind of stay ready to adapt on the definitions and mechanic side while staying true to the identity and the goal of the game.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to do something real dirty real quick and unprecedented, but a quick throwback to the conversation we were having before the show started about the intent of Ashes of Creation to try to move things forward in a mechanical manner. That we've seen a few attempts over the years. The biggest production one was probably EverQuest Next. And we saw the attempts with Revival and Chronicles of Illyria, trying to do this thing where it's going beyond just the MMO, trying to get closer to the server as this like wide scale DM that's running a giant tabletop game for everybody, except a little bit more in real time. And obviously, because of the rules, you have to have some trade-offs. You're not going to be able to climb every tree or like chew on bark and like spit it on a wound or something, unless it's actually in the mechanics. But we're not making a VR sim here. We're trying to make,
there's a degree of nuance between what is over immersive, where it becomes tedious or where it becomes non-meaningful to kind of engage in that level of immersion. And of course there's a spectrum that every player lives on, which they want to see immersion represented in, right? And trying to find the most equitable level of that spectrum of immersion is the magic sauce, right? And I think that what we're doing with Ashes of Creation is we're taking it back to, as you just described, the roots of why these graphical MMOs exist in the first place, which is that kind of D&D callback, that tabletop RPG setting, which is, I think, what we're able to capture graphically. I mean, why did MUDs, happen? My first ever MMO was Neverwinter on AOL back in 1991, 1992, where you kind of got to see the experience you had on the table, pen, and paper be represented with pixels in a game. And it just adds to the storytelling part when you're capable of suspending that disbelief to a higher fidelity because of what the immersive qualities of that game is presenting you. That's the holy grail, I think, in MMO gameplay. And that's probably the biggest differentiator between an RPG genre of video game and any other genre out there.
So I have a follow-up question since Bill Trost's name was mentioned. What qualifications of Bill's led you to choose him for your lead game designer?
That's a great question. Funny story. Bill was actually the very first person that we had ever interviewed for Intrepid back in, I think it was the end of 2015. And I was always impressed, as I said, Bill's one of the co-creators, I think, of the mmorpg genre that we know today with his work on the EverQuest franchise. Moving from EverQuest, going to Defiance, going to Amazon, A New World, those things, that gives a breadth of experience and knowledge that I just think is fundamental to executing well in MMORPG development. So for me, there is obviously alignment with Bill on the more kind of old school approach that I think modern MMOs have deviated from over the course of the last decade or so. There's a lot of alignment and shared thoughts there with Bill that gave me a great confidence in his role at the studio now.
Like what? Name some of those old school ideas.
Yeah, I think the idea of putting massive back in massively multiplayer, right? I think the idea of not being delegated and stuck to a railroaded experience that you don't really have a participative aspect in the story that's being told. I think that the social connection, the MMOs are not built for solo players, even though they have solo things to do, that you're encouraged and have the opportunity to participate with newfound friends that are across the world and parties and guilds and different types of social structures, social being one of the focal points of systems design, right? I think the idea of creating soft friction events where the game isn't telling you not to like or not to cooperate with this person, but there's opportunities that arise because of these events that create either social friction or cooperation. Those are like fundamental components. Also, like the risk versus reward aspect. This is all very aligned with kind of Ashes of Creation's attempting to create this not a trophy experience for everyone. That is a little bit old school. The harder work methodology of being proud of what you accomplished because it took something to accomplish it. Like those are fundamental in creating an experience that's rewarding to the player.
Nero? Phantom?
Yeah, Phantom, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we're good. So I can start putting some stuff in there. Everybody's asking where's the real questions. It was actually somewhat debatable within your Discord about whether we should ask about freeholds because of the article stuff coming out. But anyways, I do have some questions about that.
I think it's fair. Yeah, absolutely. Ask anything.
One of the things that stuck out, you had mentioned, I think in actually Discord chat, part of the reason for using a non-land rush system, the bidding system, was to allow people, individuals, families to gather time and resources together in order to participate. And what I was curious about was the word of resources. So when we're building, are we only spending gold, or are we actually having to procure other resources that are used in that building system? Do we have to have some sort of material besides just gold that is then used in bidding?
It's a combination of three primary acquisition models. One is the acquisition of gold. Two is the acquisition of as you are aware of them, they're called certificates publicly, but we have an internally different name that we haven't released yet. These certificates are character bound, right? So as you go out and you hunt things or you do certain quests, you get these certificates. You can use them to acquire commodities and then trade those commodities around regionally the world in exchange for unique either rewards through gold or other materials. So you're acquiring materials, you're acquiring certificates, and you're acquiring gold. Those are the three methods by which you will be constructing the freehold system. So it's a combination of a lot of different things.
But the build itself is, or bid, when we bid itself, is that just purely gold? We're going to a location and here's your money.
Right now, that's a little bit point of discussion. We have two approaches that we're going to be testing. One is going to be that certain freeholds are available just through gold auctioning. And then the other system is that there are going to be certain locations that are available both through gold and through a other metric, which would be either character bound like certificates that you acquire, or favor, or another mechanic, currency mechanic that you have to acquire through personal effort. And we're going to see if that works out well in addition to the system. So there's kind of two approaches there: gold only, and then gold plus bound performance metric, which would be that separate type of currency.
Yeah, because part of where that came up was people asking questions about like religious nodes. Are they really going to spend gold, or is there some other way using the actual node type as a way to procure a freehold?
Yeah, I'm kind of being sensitive not to touch on a couple of topics that we haven't yet revealed. So for example, you bring up a religious node. We have this concept, in other games that we played where you have these like PvP type honor systems. And that's kind of an individual currency that you acquire through performance, through multiple quests or arena systems, right, that we've experienced. And then you use that currency to purchase unique either gear that's limited in time or whatever, right? We have a similar concept that we're going to be utilizing across different types of nodes, potentially. And in the religious node that you mentioned, one of those concepts is something called favor. And favor is acquired through participating in certain religious quest lines, through repeatable activities that you can achieve it, and through turning in certain types of material acquisitions to acquire the favor. So the secondary concept of not just using gold to bid on the freeholds is having some freeholds that are biddable only with gold, and then some freeholds based on the node that you are trying to acquire the freehold in would require that you excel within that personal progressive currency form. So in divine nodes, it might be the favor, and in a military node, it might be the honor. And then you can bid on select parcels with those specific currencies in addition to the gold.
And is it the mayor or whoever runs the node triggering the bidding process?
No, these are systems defined. So humans don't have an opportunity to kind of change the frequency or the amount that get released through the auction system. Those, when the node stands up, there will be a cadence where these freeholds get released over time through bidding. So it's not all at once, and then you have kind of some that go really high and some that go really low, but rather you keep a pace of releasing these over time into the public. And then after a period of time, all of them get released from the system, and then players then have an opportunity to trade amongst themselves and list their own that they've built up.
Well, I could keep going, but I'm gonna let Neuro take a turn here. So.
And again, I just want to state that I don't have eyes on chat, so I don't know how people are kind of responding to these or have questions about these. But what I would say is that it's very important to note that while you are seeing kind of gameplay and the game looks great, and I always see people saying, "Hey, this game's ready to launch now, launch it." This looks better than other games that I'm playing that have been released for 10 years, whatever. The intent behind our design approach is to methodically create, because this is such an ambitious project with so many interdependent systems that are very intricately necessary to work well with one another, is that we go through these iteration phases, not just external iteration phases like Alpha 2, but internally as we play test these things. And you guys are hearing in somewhat real time our design direction. And so keeping a grain of salt with these topics as we give these definitions, that these designs are all subject to change, right? And they should be. Like it is important. The iteration step is probably the most important step of any game development. So that means we have to be willing, able, and ready to iterate on the designs based on both our internal playtesting, external feedback, and then we always use as our navigational guide, what are the pillars, the core pillars, what is the philosophy of the design, what are we trying to accomplish that's meaningful for the player's interaction, as our guiding tool when we iterate.
Confirmed. Ashes will launch before 2030.
Yeah. Unbelievable. What I will say is, when I see the funny comments about before 2030, before 2046, I am not aiming for perfection with Ashes. I think that's an unattainable goal. I think it is a crazy thing to try and achieve. What I am trying to achieve is not the dismal launches that I've experienced of other MMORPGs. I'm not going to call it names. I'm not going to say it's anybody's fault. I'm just going to say that there is a certain point where you want to launch a game and you feel it's ready to launch, and if you launch it before that point, it's a dangerous endeavor, because a lot of work and effort goes into making these types of game. Years of work and effort from hundreds of people, developers that are working on these projects, and if you don't give it the proper time to bake, that effort can be wasted. And I understand the patience level of the community, of players who are seeing this, and it's a difficult journey to take, because you're seeing something, a genre you love, you're seeing a game that looks great. We're getting all the positive indicators on the development that we're doing from the community. But we need to temper ourselves, our expectations, the timelines, because we want to do this right. And doing it right means we got to give it the proper time to bake.
I have a quick question.
Let me real quick.
Chat.
Real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Just because it's in the same vein, we realized, and we weren't going to ask this, when's Alpha 2? You've been asked that numerous times. It's always the same answer. I think one of the questions that I have, and the community has had too, though, is, there's the conversation of there will probably be NDA spot testing that starts to happen. Mm-hmm. When that happens, well, obviously it's NDA, so we wouldn't know the specifics, but will the community at large know that has started?
That's a tricky question. I would say no, not all the testing. I would say that there's been testing already done in the past that the community is unaware of. There's a reason for that. Okay, I'll put my marketing hat on for a second. We
know that we have PI testing, right? Or is it PI? What's the?
There are Phoenix Initiative testings that have occurred in the past, not for Alpha 2 yet. Let me put my mark.
But we normally don't know when those are.
Correct.
But for the other ones, you normally let us know that it's at least started. We don't know who's in it.
It depends. It depends. Putting on the marketing hat for a second. We're doing something that's fundamentally different approach that most games of this budget do, right? And what I mean by that is, not to say that there aren't other projects that do this, there are some, but what I mean by that is what we're showing now is not catered to a broad audience approach. What we're showing now in our development, our monthly developments, that is more catered towards a core audience of followers who have been either part of this journey, and sometimes it gets exposure when it gets picked up by larger streamers and influencers that are out there, and they show to their audience. But that's a risky endeavor, because not everything is polished. Not everything is completed. When people see the UI, they say, "What the hell is this?" Or when they see, other aspects of the game development, they say, "Oh, this is trash." And so this process isn't yet catered for a broad audience. And when we make an announcement like NDA testing has begun, that tends to have legs in the marketing sense. And that tends to get picked up rapidly, because then people have that fear of, oh, okay, the starting's begun. I'm going to miss out on it. I'm going to go get the package and jump into it. And that sets a certain level of expectation that is prone for disappointment. And we don't want to do that yet, right? So to answer your question, No, we may not always announce when the NDA testing is because we're not definitive how that testing is going to influence the future testing schedule. And we don't want to set the wrong expectation from a broader audience perspective on what they should be expecting with regards to testing. So, we have to be careful there. This is a little bit of a juggle, right? This transparency approach is a double-edged sword, and we have to be cognizant of that when we move forward.
Yeah, makes sense.
So the change, you used to do that in the early days before you realized you shouldn't be as transparent as you.
Yeah, this is a learning process.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was a quick question from chat about the difference between parcels and plots.
Sure. So this is one of the things that I wanted to add into the article that we were planning to release last week with some graphical representation of how that parcel systems works. But essentially, imagine the parcel as more like a county that exists around the node, right? And so if you have a node in the center and you have its zone of influence around it, that's a mass group of land, okay? And then if you were to take a county line marker and create counties around essentially the node, that is what you would be bidding on. And then once you've achieved the parcel certificate for that county, then you go out with your footprint of your node, your footprint of your freehold, and you get to place the freehold within that county wherever you want that's not obstructed by some other road or POI or, very large feature terrain. So that's kind of how that systems work. And that way we're able to create, something in that county theming or the immersive quality of it that's representative of maybe some small POI interests like a Sherwood Forest, as I used as an example, right? Like you owned that county per se, and your freehold's placed within that somewhere.
So yeah, you mentioned the idea of a Sherwood Forest. So when we have specific kind of labeled areas, parcels,
correct,
there will be no restriction on the skins that can be used in these specific areas, or there will be.
No, skins. Okay. No, there won't be. And the artists are, that's a I don't like to use this term, but that's an art problem in the sense that when we talk about what we're trying to achieve visually through either the concept art or when the model is completed, with sometimes effects or certain material uses that might be contrast or conflict with kind of the visuals of the terrain or the biome, that's an interesting problem to solve. Sometimes it involves tech art. Sometimes it involves very talented modelers and artists and material artists that are creating these things. But making it in such a way where it doesn't create the sore thumb. The Thor thumb. Okay.
You spoonerized it. That's cool.
know. Oh my God. The sore thumb or the clown show kind of perspective. That's the difficulty part. And so far in the creation of our of the cosmetics that we've done through the pre-order shop, but also there's cosmetics that will be available in game of comparative quality for the freehold system. We want to give players a wide range of customization options where they can make this freehold their own, where they're capable of kind of changing the visuals to reflect the thematic components they want to have experienced in the game, and we don't want to have that be constrained through biome or through location.
So I have a question here. It kind of touches on the freehold placement and some of the stuff people are asking about, but also about some of the upgrades. So with the freehold neighbor system, is it possible for neighbors to gain bonuses off of each other's upgraded structures? Can I place my spot adjacent to my buddy's spot, like touching the same edge, and be able to share bonuses across? No?
There's a minimum distance that is required between the counties, and essentially that creates a minimum distance then between the freeholds. So
all freeholds basically have this minimum distance.
Correct.
Every parcel is basically one freehold upon it.
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha. So then I guess the other half of the question was about if somebody wanted to min-max. You were showing like the tech trees for the crafting upgrade structures. let's say I got 3 different rare blacksmith shop upgrade things. I filled out all the tech trees that they had the special things in. Now my place is hypothetically able to make the best damn weapons or whatever the blacksmithing upgrades. So if someone was going to min-max, that's how they're going to do it, is on one parcel, just force in 3 buildings or whatever, fill out the whole tech tree.
To a degree, yes. So the idea behind the profession buildings and their access to certain tech trees is that you will have a limited number of permits available to place these buildings. A freehold currently has 6 maximum buildings that can be placed apart from the house. 6 maximum buildings that can be placed that are profession or business-based buildings. In order to fully spec out a particular tree of one profession, you'll need in most cases at a minimum 2 of the buildings, right, for that particular profession, and that also grants you access to have all 4 of the workstations that profession's building provides, and then you can spec into those tech trees. So you're occupying additional levels of permits in order to achieve that kind of broad spectrum mastery over that particular profession, as opposed to specializing within the mastery of that profession.
Gotcha. That does give a lot of promise for a small group with one freehold to be able to have a huge impact just through what they've specialized in. It's like, absolutely. You want to get the best this or that or whatever, you come here. And if you want to make sure you can keep coming here, you're going to defend these lands from attack.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, like, you know, the intent of that approach from a design perspective is to complement, again, the goal or the pillar of making crafters significantly important. And part of that significance is the level of investment required in order to achieve the types of accomplishments that those master crafters want to achieve and leave a mark on the server as a result. Giving them that broad level of influence over a market with a single freehold, especially utilizing, let's say, the family system, that is something that I think helps achieve that goal.
Awesome. Well, that'll be really cool to see. All right, I'll pass the mic.
Okie dokie. Sorry, Phantom. Open seas I have a question about, and I think my question is, the first part is, what happens to corrupted players when they enter the open seas? Do they remain corrupt?
Yes. Yeah.
And what are the death penalties in open seas?
So if you are corrupted and you enter the open seas, you are still corrupted. And the death penalties that are applied to corrupt players are universal anywhere within the world. So that doesn't change based on the zone. If you are not corrupt and you enter the open seas, then you will be taking a mitigated form of the death penalties, which means you will have a debuff applied upon death. And in addition, you will still suffer the gear degradation or gear decay upon death as well. But you will essentially be either significantly reduced in the experience debt accrued through death in the open seas if you're not corrupt, or there won't be experience debt accrued in the open seas if you are not corrupt.
So is it the same as green or even less than green?
Even less than green.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
So I'm curious about citizenship. This has come up a few times. The wiki, which is great. Everyone, I'm sure, knows about the wiki. If not, go to it. It's a great source of information. Lex
huge props to Lex for that. I mean, really, it is great.
Everything that's on there, when it refers to apartments, when it refers to freeholds and instance or the static housing, mentions that you have the opportunity to be a citizen. So it's kind of 2 questions. So one is, once you own the freehold or the apartment, do you automatically become a citizen, or can you elect not to be? And the other is just, once we've reached sort of a metropolis stage, is how many citizens, is there a cap to the number of citizens a node could have along the way?
So with regards to owning property, any type of property or instanced housing, it does not automatically create citizenship for you. This is an election that the player makes, whether or not they want to be a citizen of that node. You can only ever be a citizen of one node. And owning housing is a form of entrance prerequisite criteria in order to become a citizen. Now, the reason for that is there are different types of housing systems. You can be a member of up to 3 of those housing systems. Static and node housing, the instance department or in housing, and the freehold system housing. Excuse me. And players can own those at different nodes, and there's relevance to that because of the types of functional furnitures that are capable of being achieved through the housing system, as well as storage capacities, and the types of crops that can be grown. Even static in node housing and instance housing will have certain methods by which you can grow certain things for gatherables. So the second part of your question was, is there a cap on the number of citizens that can be a part of a particular node? There is not a hard cap, there is a soft cap. And what that means is, if you go on the wiki, I think we've talked about this in the past, and some of it might have changed a little bit over the course of the last year or two, is that when you become a citizen, you enter in at a certain citizenship due structure. And citizens pay taxes to their node in the form of both property taxes based on if they own which type of housing, as well as citizenship dues, which are necessary. And as you enter later into the stage of a node's development, you will pay a higher value on the citizenship dues, or vice versa. If you own a property later, you will be entered into a property tax structure that is higher based on where you enter that property ownership within the node's history. So those kind of help to form a soft cap. Now, if players are willing to pay more to be a citizen of a particular node, they have that option, right? But at some point, it becomes restrictive.
So did I hear this correctly? Because this is also a fairly frequently asked question, was would instanced apartments allow for some sort of crafting and or processing type stations within them?
Not stations, but what they will allow for is certain types of furniture, such as a flowering pot that allows the placement of some types of seeds, which can then be processed and harvested from the flowering pot, or different types of furnitures that allow limited use interactions that relate to either processing, gathering, or crafting.
Okay. So you could, one of the things I tossed around the forums was the idea of almost like a greenhouse. So that similar idea of being able to just have individual plants.
Correct.
Cool. And then this came out of the chat. So just for clarification, can you own a freehold in one node and a apartment in a different node at the same time?
Absolutely. Yes, okay. That is the intent.
I have a question. Is it my turn? Guys?
For it.
Just go for it.
Okay.
I mean, I have a question about corruption, but I'm not sure how much we're going to get to learn about that.
I think this one is kind of quick while you look for yours, or how you want to phrase it.
No, go for yours.
Yeah, this one is from Niker from the forums. He asks, what would be the daily activities for someone at level 50 with a maxed out artisan tree? Kind of wondering what we're supposed to do in end game, kind of, even though we don't have an end game. But so you hit level 50. So I would be thinking you're still progressing your node. You're still trying to defend. You've got some social org stuff you can do. You've got some naval content you can do. But what in your mind?
This is a chunky question. So, what are the types of activities you would be doing as a max level profession in level 50? A lot of that, I'm going to say, depends on the world state, and it depends on what's happening within the world, right? You have this concept of the story arc system and of nodes that are in a constant state of flux of what's happening, right? And as they're in that state of flux, they're unlocking different types of content around the world that can be predicated on certain time frames, like a particular story arc that might last for a few days, or you might have certain needs that arise from certain nodes that are trying to do construction projects and need certain types of materials. You might have an intent to kind of control the market from an auction house perspective on the types of items that only you have access to because of a relic that your node controls. Like, a lot of that answer is situationally dependent on what state the world has acquired, and then how that state influences the supply and demand structure from a crafter slash processor slash gathering perspective, right? If that's what we're specifically talking about. And I think the most opportune individuals who have achieved that level of mastery because they want to capitalize on how that can progress their character, their families, or their guilds are going to be looking out for the opportunities that relate to either trade, that relate to either the crafting and sale of particular types of items, in order to provide that service and edge the market in a sense, right? So the daily activity might be something along the lines of, depending on what type of profession or processor you are, of interacting with fellow artisanship individuals to kind of wheel and deal on supply and demand chains, orchestrating and participating in caravan runs that move materials across the world so that you can satisfy buy orders and or commission requests, participating in unique raids and or dungeon experiences that have the opportunity to acquire unique crafting materials so that you can create the dragon's legendary sword and sell that potentially. Finding unique harvestable materials in remote parts of the world, or engaging in treasure map finding for again unique materials and or processing things. Like, there's a whole host of different intents that are loops for the players to participate in that, again, are situationally relevant based on the world state. And that's why, to your point, Diggs, when you say, like, I know we're not supposed to have an end game, it's because end game to me communicates static, right? It is a static structure. Okay, you've entered this loop now, and this is your end game loop that you will repeat over and over. Whereas instead, the approach for Ashes is, you have now reached a point where all of these loops are relevant. And the loops are present to you depending on how the community engages the world, right? And it's up to you to identify the most promising loops because you have a finite amount of time and resources in which you can engage with them. And that's then where strategy becomes a part of the picture, right? How will I choose to engage with these loops to maximize my return or to maximize the specific benefit I wish to bring an individual group, myself, or guild, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that does answer a lot for sure. The question that I had was about corruption. If you can tell us more about how corruption in a region takes root, how it spreads, how that spreading affects freeholds and points of interest, and the ability to potentially maintain a freehold surrounded by encroaching corruption, and if that's the sort of thing that we'll be seeing in Alpha 2 or not.
So we saw a very specific example of corruption within Alpha 1. I don't know if you recall, but when you kind of crossed away from the starting island over into the tropical area, there was a section of the world that was kind of twisted and geometrically awkwardly cockeyed the terrain, and you saw unique types of resources and terrain features, and then you saw ancients that were spawning around, like little demon ancients or whatever, that were spawning around that location. So if you think about that for a moment, what does corruption do as it kind of seeps in through the world? And it seeps in a way that's responsive to player progression. So as the nodes develop, as the world becomes more civilized by society, going out and standing up these cities and these nodes and whatnot, corruption responds to that, right? It is an equal pushback that it's trying to achieve, and it's up to the players to kind of thwart the advancement of that corruption through achieving certain story arc quest lines, through killing certain bosses, through, participating in content that relates to that corruption seeping into the world. But corruption's not all bad, because corruption changes spawners, and it changes populations, and it changes resources that become available, unique resources. As a matter of fact, we saw over the course of the last few months different types of resources that have altered states when corruption is present, and it becomes a corrupt version of itself, which is a necessary component for certain types of crafting certain type of crafting endeavors as well. So there is a relevance, meaningful component of why that corruption would want to be interacted with from the player's perspective, but it's a push and pull situation. That's really what corruption is intended to provide. Push and pull between the advancement of society and what was there that's more feral.
I see. So then, does that, how would that affect like freeholds if it hasn't fully encroached to the city itself? Would a freehold be like surrounded and enveloped by it, or is it more that the corruption stays in place and just gets denser and denser until it overwhelms the area?
Yeah, it won't really affect the freehold systems. The corruption is really meant to live more in wild and nature and not on the player freehold.
Okay.
So the player freehold is kind of protected to a degree from that, more contained.
Okay. And then is there like always like there's that circle of crystals there that never goes away, and that's always where the corruption comes from, or will it like dissipate from an area if it's cleared and reappear in some other part of the wild?
My goal with that system, and we haven't yet gotten to the development side of tech art and engineering kind of providing these tools, so I don't think you'll see the goal in Alpha 2, but the goal is that it is more dynamic and spreads across the world a bit more. That's something that still requires some technical solutions that we have yet to tackle. But ultimately, the fallback would be that it's more static and densifies over time.
Gotcha. I mean, I imagine it's more than just having another world layer, and then it's like, oh, now it's shifting into corruption, and that there's going to be a lot more technical stuff to it than that for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I've always, from the start, just wanted to own a farm and do that sort of stuff. So I have some obviously big interest in the last stream with freeholds. One of the questions that's come up, and I don't want to get into the whole casual, hardcore, blah, blah, blah. But one of the questions that's come up is you have mentioned the processing that you can do some to a degree at the node level. Obviously, correct. Master level things have to occur at a freehold. So does that include animal husbandry and farming? Like, are there going to actually be areas within a node that you can plant, or is that just out in the wild? And then, well, I'll let you finish. I'll do that one first.
Yeah. Yeah. So the intent is that there are also public spaces where animal husbandry and farming can be utilized. And I don't know, some games that we've played have these ideas of like public farms that you can rent space in for a period of time, and you have, the availability to utilize. Those systems provide opportunities for players who might be more solo oriented, aren't a part of a family, don't think they'll be able to acquire a freehold, but still want to participate with those particular types of professions. But they may not do it at a mastery level as a result, but they'll still have access to lower tier versions of that so that they can progress through that particular profession up to a degree. And then if they want to seek out a group that has a freehold and has access to the mastery progression, they can try to elicit membership into their family or membership into a guild to gain access to those features, right? But the public spaces are intended to provide those individuals with a layer of progression that's more suited towards their individual gameplay or solo gameplay aspect of it.
And so, like Phantom, if I'm helping Phantom out on his farm, he can give me permissions to get to grandmaster level.
Yes,
using
that is correct.
And he could just give me those permissions if we're good enough friends, or he could charge a fee if he wanted to. Is that the way I understand that?
Yes. So there is an outstanding question on whether or not we should provide permissions to members who are not a part of a social structure. And what I mean by social structure is not just that, hey, I found, Joe Blow on the side of the street and he needs access to this thing. I'm just going to open it to public, the permissions to public. Personally, I don't think that achieves the goal of the system. I don't think that that's a desired quality. I think that we need to have a more formalized structure in place, which is given through the family system and or through guild systems. And I think that is how we're going to initially test it and see how we get feedback and how it implements around the desires of progression for that particular system. And so what that means is you'll be able to provide permissions to those social groups, not to anyone.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay.
For tavern owners and things like that, can you actually block people from coming on? Is there any ability to say?
No, there's no built-in discrimination permissions.
Okay. That's what I figured. And then with the sort of processing stations, crafting, do they wear out over time? Like, do they have to be repaired? Do they eventually degrade to where you have to just build a new machine?
That's something that we're still discussing internally. It is coded in such a way where it's an easy variable for us to kind of change, that there are material components that are necessary to kind of feed the machines to keep them up and running, or it could be based on how you interact with the fuel components. If you overcharge with fuel, that can create like system degrade similar to your armor decay, which then you have to feed materials in order to rebuild maintenance wise. Right now, it is not implemented with that in mind. The only maintenance required is going to be through taxation. And depending on the number of permits that you have placed on the freehold will increase the amount of taxes that are necessary to be paid for the freehold. So you increase that maintenance based on how effectively you're using the property, essentially. But there is an opportunity for us to iterate on that depending how we see the system perform.
Okay. And similarly, for things like the crops, the seeds, the animals we breed, Lineker had actually asked us on the forums, things like battle pets or pets that we are using in the animal husbandry system. Do those also eventually, do you exhaust a line? So do I always get a seed from a plant, or do I always get a pet from a parent, or do you eventually get to where?
Not always.
Okay, so eventually you just have to start over.
There is a diminishing return, so to speak, within the system. So it is not 100% self-revolving in that sense. There is going to be a diminishing return, which then requires the player to go and interact with the world again in order to supply and support the system.
Would that include mounts, things like that? Does your mount eventually?
The mounts are a little bit of a touchier subject. I'm not sure how many players. I mean, me personally, and I use this as a guiding metric, of course, as I'm helping to design these systems. Do I want to see my trusted mount, Seabiscuit, die or get retired or turned into glue? No, that's a touch point with the player that's I think a bit controversial. So mounts do not degrade over time. Once you have a mount, you own a mount. I think there's another way to service limited access to mounts as you acquire them, and that's through the stable system, and how we utilize what your quote unquote active mounts are based on slotting into the stable system. I don't think we've talked about that yet as a system as a whole. So I would reserve a little bit expanding on that until we get into it with some of the node showcases.
I'll keep going. The chat's getting restless.
I've got another one here for you.
How's the chat enjoying the conversation? I can't.
Most of chat is being pretty cool, and then there's a few people who are like, "No, you're not asking the right question. You're wasting time. What are you doing? You just need to be asking questions and getting answers. Don't let them talk, man. Just go blind."
There's a lot of this is on the wiki. I personally tried to make sure none of what I'm asking is on the wiki, but certainly proved me wrong. So
it's always hard. It's always hard with an open development. You have different members of an audience or different members of the community that join at different times. And so they may not have been exposed to some answers that have already been provided, or they might have been, or they haven't gone through the wiki. So sometimes you guys are going to experience a little bit of overlap there. And I think that's okay, because that overlap also gives an opportunity for us to see what things might have changed over the course of time, because I don't have a photographic memory of everything the wiki says, and things are changing in a constant basis anytime you're in open development.
And there's one other thing people who are new to these kind of interviews don't realize. If we let you just kind of go for a while, you might say something that's totally never been revealed.
Oh my God! Don't tell Margaret that. Don't tell Margaret.
Well, I mean, she knows, but
that was good. That's like a leaking tactic. Just let him talk.
It's one of those things. Yeah. So that's one of the. We've seen it happen before. We've seen it happen with developers on all sorts of games. So. It's instead of like having very specific, rigid, like yes, no, short answers where it's like this could have just been an email sort of thing.
Yes.
No, we didn't come here to just do an email and then read off the results. Yeah, we know that you're here. We were actually discussing whether we wanted to give you out like a mute button or not, or like the ability to do like an air horn when he says something so we just get our ears blown out and don't get to hear it.
That's so
great. No, the question that I had, and this is, kind of going with what you were saying there, updating on previous thoughts and things, because I know it was initially like a hard no, and Jim the Bowyer dies and he's gone, and I think maybe things have changed on this a little bit. Are there plans to add more persistence to the world, like ways to complete repeating events in a way that it is sealed and never returns again unless it's replaced by like a new escalating event? Like you've killed Tumok and now Tumok's brother, who may have cast him out but still saw him as a brother, is coming for revenge or something like that, and to have things kind of changing. Or also the idea of adding like more stable NPCs who migrate. When they die off, they get replaced by newcomers from Sanctus or the Tulnar Hidden Zone or whatever. So it's not just like people are able to migrate if they survive a situation, or it might just be the conditions change. It's like I'm a logger, there's no logging in this place anymore, I'm out of here.
So what I'm hearing, I think, in this question is, after certain content loops have been experienced, is there a method by which some of those content loops get retired or changed fundamentally? And what I would say is that there is a method by which we create a canon for the server of events. Those canons are usually going to be immortalized through systems like the library, which recounts certain types of events that happen on a server and recount perhaps the members who participate in those events, immortalize them over time as the kind of first-time defeaters, first-time accomplishers, that perspective. But in an MMO environment where there is so much content creation that's necessary, and some of that content is really intricate and takes a lot of time to develop, you don't really ever want to fully retire content based off of unique experience that some portion of the population has without providing that opportunity to the rest of the server population, because over time, players who join at different periods within the linear history of a particular server, you want to have them hit those beats. So they may not remember the first time it was down, but they did that content as well, and they can relate to the experiences and memories that you've acquired as a participant on this world, right? So there's not going to be a fully retired, but there is a system that canonizes events on a first-time basis / unique to the first-time users.
I see. Interesting.
I imagine it's very interesting, the idea of creating all of these different storylines, smaller storylines, larger story arcs, and the possibility that some servers might not necessarily ever see them is a very interesting idea of how you do that and not waste sort of time or resources.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and it relates kind of very fundamentally back to the beginning of this entire project, which was, I am a fan of sandbox environments as an MMO player, and there are certain types of players that enjoy curated content, railroaded experiences. Take me through the beats. I want to hear the story. I'm reading a book, so to speak, right? And I talked about this very early on, that my most impression, like the books that had the biggest impression on me when I was a kid, was the books that you got to choose your destination throughout chapter and chapter, those quote unquote choose your own adventure books. When I was like in middle school, I loved these, the Goosebumps series and stuff. and R.L. Stein, and reading those choose your own adventure paths was very fun for me. And I think Netflix came out with like a few years ago that Bandersnatch movie where you could go back and choose the arc in the chapter. I'm not sure how successful that was, but I thought that was so cool. I went back and watched different chapter arc choices, and I got to see. My point is that in a lot of MMO developments where they try to achieve the sandbox feeling, they create a lot of different doors, right, for the player to choose between, but there's nothing really on the other side of the door. It's just a choice for the sake of having a choice. And then they say, okay, player generated content or player, driven content. You guys make the content through social interactions and politicals. And while I feel that that's important and you want to provide the tools for that to exist, you need to also provide a path by which the doors actually have meaningful content decisions. And what that means is, as you pointed out, that sometimes content might not get experienced because the door hasn't been open for a long period of time. And if you utilize a predicate system to kind of determine which doors reveal which content, that is a real reality that can occur. But it is something that provides a sense of meaning to the content that does get exposed. And it requires a little bit more investment on the studio that's creating the game to be willing to create content that's predicated on the players opening the door.
Yeah. I think we actually talked about this in a past interview too, is the idea of expansions, like how you reconcile servers at different points and introduce new content at the same time across all servers is also a very interesting idea.
And you just actually gave a great point too, right? Which is that those expansions, those the not DLCs, the expansions, the updates, right, that occur, those are inflection points where you can go back and you can see, okay, which doors were the least opened in the previous version? And now how do we introduce new predicates for the door to open potentially in this expansion, right? So it's always a checkpoint, right? As you make this game, it's not like, oh, we made this content, it's never going to get revealed. No. Each inflection point, which is those updates, those expansions, those whatever, right? You get to go back, reevaluate. Hey, it seems like, 89% of the servers out there never opened this door. Well, maybe the predicates were too granular. Maybe they were too focused. Maybe there's a reason why that didn't happen. Let's expand on that for the next expansion so that this content has an opportunity to come out and see the light of day.
Also, you talked in the past, I didn't have a name for this before, but you've talked in the past about what I would now call seasons, like releasing stuff every 3 months that's not really a expansion, but it's an update that adds new lore and new cosmetics and all that stuff.
Sure.
I think that concept I would probably label seasons these days.
Yeah, probably.
Like
yeah. There's a lot of different terminology that's used out there in the MMO / game dev vernacular. But I think ultimately,
I'm just saying, but like WoW has World of Warcraft has kind of implemented that since you kind of brought it up. So they now have seasons, and that kind of reminds me of the kind of thing you were talking about. Something coming up every 3 months instead of having to wait 3 years for any new content.
For sure.
So I have a question. My question is about summoners, bards, and Tulnar. I'm wondering
Summoner,
if those
bards,
are
and
going to
Tulnar. Walk into a bar.
I'm wondering exactly. And Jeffrey Bard is playing there. I'm wondering if those will be available to test at the start of Alpha 2. And I'm wondering when you think we might see UE5 models of Tulnar. Are you thinking we'll see that this year or next year? I mean, it can be open. I'm just wondering. Closer to this year or closer to next year? Just the models for Tulnar.
So I think that on the schedule that bards will be intended to be present at the start of Alpha 2, but summoners will not. And I believe that the Tulnar will not be this year, but will be next year.
Just even seeing the models for them?
Correct. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, the models? Just seeing the models?
Yeah, just the models. Just seeing the models.
That might be this year. I don't know. There's some.
Okay.
There's some.
Yeah,
we have the base models for the 3 unique versions of that. Right now, the tech, I think, is going between how we manipulate those versions in the character creator to kind of slide between the 3 types. So you might see the models for them this year. We'll see.
And I have a kind of follow-up question about summoners, and this might relate kind of to how augments work. But last year I was in a discussion with Nurath. He was hoping to have a demonic shaman. I think shaman is cleric summoner. And so I'm wondering about like how those. 'Cause I think that would not be the theme or motif. I think demon summoning would not be the motif for a cleric summoner shaman. It would probably be totems or something else, spirits and totems maybe. And then if a shaman, a cleric summoner, could summon a demon, what kind of augment school might that fall under?
That is that's a good question. So I also do not know that we will have the opportunity for us to have a demonic school of augmentation available for the shaman. I don't think that's going to be the case. It's a bit antithetical to kind of the approach of how the classes systems are meant to represent kind of these role fantasies, these class fantasies, especially when put into the context of the game. That's not to rule it out from a future expansion perspective, but at least initially, that's not the desire.
And I was thinking cosmetically, you might be able to get close
correct.
to like
yes.
that,
So
right?
how do you bridge the divide, right, between what's in the systems and or mechanics and visually or thematically how you want to present your class? And that is where cosmetics / achievements in games that achieve those cosmetics might help to kind of bridge the divide in those themings. Your second part of the question, which was like, what is the summoning school augmentation? Augments are still being actively kind of worked on and fleshed out. They will not be present in a large form at the start of Alpha 2. There might be some representations of augmenting, limited on a per class basis, but the summoner is still actively in development on the augment side.
Mm-hmm. And we might see Bard at the beginning of
yes,
Alpha 2,
Bard
but
is
probably
scheduled.
not.
Bard is scheduled to be present at the start of Alpha 2, not summoner though.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
And by schedule, I mean all things are subject to change.
Yes.
There was actually, since we're on the summoner question, there was a question about whether summoners would be locked into a creature type. So sort of the necromancer, would they only be able to do undead, or would they have a opportunity to summon other creature types?
The great thing about the animal husbandry tech that we're creating and the idea of having customization options is that there might be some opportunity there to really create a more customized experience for the summoner and the types of visual representation that their creature has that's more to the player's definition. But we will see about that. I think you guys will be getting some updates in the future about that.
I think they're wondering about Rogue too, but I think we were expecting Rogue for Alpha 1. So
Rogue is scheduled to also be at the start of Alpha 2 as well. Yeah. The only the only archetype that's not scheduled currently to be at the start of Alpha 2 is Summoner.
Okay. Cool. Good to know.
Naval combat.
No, actually, I got one real quick out of chat. Ratsu asked, probably a good follow-up to that. What systems are still needed to be rolled out before Alpha 2?
What systems are still needed to be rolled out? Well, I don't think it's at a core level that there's a particular system that has yet to be feature developed. Right now, it's more along the lines of expanding on those features, getting UI support for those features. That's a big one because that is, UI, VFX, audio effects. Those are all big bottlenecks because they tend to occur at the end of the pipeline of content development. And then also ensuring that the interactions are polished and kind of working. So from a large feature perspective, let me think about that. What large feature endeavor is still outstanding on the Alpha 2 front? A lot of it's content. I'm not sure that it's a feature. It's a feature one. I can't think of any large system features that haven't been stood up from a core functional perspective that don't just need expanding on / content development on.
And when you say content, that's like art and
yes, correct.
Code and implementation,
narrative,
story,
quests,
all of that. Okay.
The assets, the modeling, the for the particular types of buildings, the armor sets, the creatures, the visual effects on ability systems. Like those are all content that accompany what the code is creating from a mechanical perspective.
So, like, if you were going to start Alpha 2 in 3 months, the only way to do that would be a lot of stuff would still be early prototype, gray box, ugly, the stuff you wouldn't want anybody to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that might give people a little more perspective. It's not that there isn't a game to play. It's that there's still some stuff that needs to be worked through. Okie dokie. I actually had, I want to squeeze in one other question just real quick because we got a lot of questions still. Combat synergy. I saw a lot of cool stuff with the mage there. I saw some cool stuff in one of the previous ones. I believe you had like one of the fightery ones and the cleric doing like some sort of stun promotion combo sort of thing.
Sure.
How much do you intend for those sort of synergy things to be done within one class, one character's, kit versus how much do you intend for them to be working with the other characters, the other archetypes and specializations to kind of promote their things or to also make sure you don't step on their feet and accidentally promote something they're trying to maximize?
Yeah, when we talk about status conditions or like keyword conditions and the promotion of those effects, there's going to be the bread and butter that each class kit has access to, right? And when they're kind of creating the type of rotation with their ability system, they're going to want to emphasize those interactions that amplify or promote a particular type of status condition. So they'll have within the kit their own interactions that they'll be able to leverage. But then in addition to that, they're going to have keyword status effects that help to either promote other classes' keyword status effects or are the executed promotions of other classes' initial status conditions, right? And when you think about the intent of the design is that players are servicing themselves from a solo perspective when they want to go out and solo grind and solo experience and fulfill the quests. But when they come together to form a party to encounter group content or a raid to encounter raid content, that the interconnectivity between those classes synergizes with these keyword promotions and or effects. And there's a way to execute on that is successful and is effective, or a way that's not. And that's kind of the skill ceiling / skill cap that requires interaction and cooperation and synchronization because there are limited time windows in which those keywords can get emphasized or executed upon when utilizing the ability.
Gotcha. Cool. It'd be fun to see when we get to try it all out. Yeah.
It's like, when you think about it, it's very much a musical endeavor, right? When you think about a symphony or a concert, right? Those instruments working with each other to formulate this kind of highly effective and very visceral, experience of this music chain. When you accomplish that in combat, it's going to be noticeable. And that's the desire is let's dopamine hit when players are effective in their skill when executing on these ideas.
No Phantom.
Yeah.
Nope. You go.
There's just a lot of
Everybody's
questions.
shouting Naval, so I want to give just a moment here to
it's not even a question
before we get to Naval.
Yeah, it's not a question. It's just screaming Naval.
I see people saying about naval gazing. No, we're not talking about unfollow skepsis here. We're talking about the different kind of naval.
What?
Unfollow skepsis is when you're like contemplating while you're looking at your belly button.
Rhetorical question. I'm just kidding.
Everybody's still like, stop talking. So there's three main questions that have sort of been presented, and I'm sure chat will mention 5 more. But
sure.
One is naval. So have you started working on naval combat yet, or not? And then
from the vehicle perspective, right? When we're talking about the ability to attach the vehicle component to a particular type of ship or whatever, like that has been developed from a core functionality perspective. Now, when we talk about how do we emulate the physics movement of the vessel in the water, that still needs to be done. How do we have certain mechanics like the attaching of particular types of weapons on the vehicle? That still needs to be done. But naval combat is something that is in and of itself a very intricate system, and it shares a lot with our general vehicle system, such as caravans and mounts that are utilized within the code. So,
and then there had been another question. This was from Figo01, which was in referring to the coastline nodes and whether your boats, or your ships, your navy, could you do an naval assault on a coastal node? So are you actually going to be able to use those weapons to actually damage the node that you're trying to take, whether that's structures or whatever might be there?
Yeah, we've gone back and forth a little bit on whether or not the design intent for sieging of nodes is intended to include, for certain nodes, the naval component. The concern there was that it would be a difficult thing to balance around that particular node having accessibility from the water for those types of defenses. So what we've kind of presented is an opportunity where harbors are the focal point of those naval interactions. And during sieges, you are aware that nodes have certain objectives which have ramifications and can influence the outcome and or the ongoings of a particular siege against a node. And if one of those objectives is a naval objective because that node might own a harbor, which is a point of interest that gets adopted by a node which advances far enough around it, right? So you might have one harbor and 5 nodes that can own that harbor, and the first to hit the village stage adopts the harbor, right? Then that can become an objective key point during a siege that has naval interaction. So that's kind of the direction we've moved towards, rather than allowing the naval component to interact directly with sieging the node itself, as opposed to being a part of the objective-based gameplay that exists for a node siege.
And then another one that's come up sort of around this too, and I'm trying to remember who even said it, was around shipbuilding. That seems to have sort of dropped off from a conversational standpoint, that at one time there was the idea that you could do that as a crafter, whether that still exists or whether that has now been sort of spread out to multiple different professions.
Yeah, the shipbuilding has been spread out to multiple different professions. So different professions are responsible for creating different components of the shipbuilding process. And then at the harbor, you will interact with a unique workstation based on having the recipe or the blueprint for the particular ship that you're attempting to build, and the components that are then derived from multiple professions to then finally create the ship item.
Okay. That's, I don't know, I'm sure there's going to be more in chat about naval stuff, but that's what I've saw so far. Actually, kind of related to that, when we sort of talk about where you're, well, kind of not really related, but on the freeholds, we know that there's taverns. One of the questions that we were given is whether or not you could tell us sort of what every service,
what every business is.
Yeah. Well, do you have a full? The question was, what is the full list of services that can be run out of a freehold? We know about taverns, but what else?
Yeah, I would reserve that question for probably a portion of the article that's coming out this next week.
Gotcha.
So, we have a list of kind of ideas that we want to service from a business perspective, but fundamentally what that service equates to is that there are a number of created consumables that are possible through the different professions. How those items become presented to the player from a business establishment perspective, and through what venue that business represents, is how we partition those consumables into different verticals for the business system. And that is something that I think we'll expand a little bit upon in the article that comes out next week.
We saw that you could sleep on the beds. Is there an animation for that?
Yeah, so absolutely.
We can have a brothel.
Oh my God. I don't know.
Well, was the multiple occupancy of beds
oh my God.
thing?
I don't know I don't think we're going to have a brothel per se.
Okay.
That might not be a good idea. However, there is
we can rent beds out, but we can rent beds out.
I mean, again, the beds are intended to provide rested experience digs. I'm not sure the brothels that you're talking about, but maybe not very restful after.
At the very least, Diggs, you could probably do a themed hotel. You've got like the sandal room where the bed's shaped like a sandal. And it's got like the beach theme. You've got like the dragon room where everything looks all edgelord and like has the Iron Throne from that one show in it. I'm just gonna call it that one show.
That one show. Season 8, which shall not be spoken of.
Yeah.
I have a kind of related question to Neuros.
Oh, okay, good.
Always. To Neuros about Alpha 2. There was a question from Crow 3 in the forums asking when Alpha 2 does roll out, what are some top key results you're hoping to achieve as an indicator of success?
Ooh, that is a good question. So, there are two primary roads, I would say, of feedback. One is the empirical kind of data that we receive through logs that show kind of player interactions with particular systems, with particular items. They have their play times. They have their kind of, retention metrics that we can look at. How often are they interacting with certain things? And that tells us one story, right? And then we have the other aspect of it, which really requires a good investment in a community team that's going to be interacting with the playtesters, that's going to formulate kind of surveys and, essentially feedback work that's responsible on behalf of the playtesters. Because, and I've said this in the past, and I'll say it again, people who want to participate in Alpha 2 are not signing up to play a game. They are signing up to test a product in development. And a lot of people view that as, an aspect that why should I pay to participate in, playtesting something? We also playtest it on the QA side. We hire companies that playtest it with their QA teams, and that ranges in the thousands of players that will be participating from a QA perspective. That the company pays for. But there is not quite any feedback that exists that is the feedback from players. And I think that is the most prime paramount example of feedback that we will iterate upon. And what we're looking for from those players is, what did you enjoy about these particular systems? What could be improved? What felt tedious? What felt meaningful? And having players kind of expand on that. Now, that's a bit less empirical than providing data from our logging metrics, right? Because now we have to have individual community team members go through, sift through these responses and find the key point takeaways that we can share with the team to see, are these designs resonating with the player base? Are they accomplishing the desired goal of emphasizing this particular philosophy or game design pillar? And is it having the type of effect that interconnects with the other systems that player is going to reference when giving their feedback, right? Do they mention these other systems when they're playing this particular one loop? Because they should be. That was the intent of the interconnectivity between them, right? Like, there's a lot of granularity in what it means and takes to sift through the player feedback. And you guys know this because you see Discord commentary and Twitch commentary, and you see forum posts that are elaborate and very detailed, and Reddit posts. Like, all of those are examples of how players feel about what they've experienced. And it takes a bit of knowing your audience for even the community team that participate in sifting through that information to accurately identify what aspects of that feedback are relevant to the development team, so that the development team isn't sitting through that time sifting through it. They're getting the key takeaways. So what I'm looking for from players is really a in-depth interaction across a host of the different systems and loops that exist within the game trying to tie in corollary loops into those experiences and seeing whether or not they feel meaningful and interconnected and the identity is present within those systems, how those systems can be improved to achieve those goals, what felt tedious and fun, how do we find that fun better, right, for different players, and different groups, because we have such an eclectic audience, are going to have different responses. And we need to collate those responses in areas that kind of express a large slice of the player population that's participating. So it's a combination of the two, the empirical data as well as the player sentiment and feedback.
So I got a quickie. Apparently, all of the stuff everyone was asking about with Naval was basically, is it going to be in Alpha 2?
Yes, it will be in Alpha 2. It will not be at the start of Alpha 2, but it will be in Alpha 2.
Okay, and then there's like a couple other questions, but folks, there will be more stuff about Naval. I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunities.
Well, and again, just to reiterate, when we talk about will Naval be in Alpha 2, Naval will be in Alpha 2 in the sense that after we launch Alpha 2, at some point in Alpha 2, Naval will be implemented as an update, and that Naval will be the ability to acquire components, construct those components, acquire recipes, construct certain types of ships, navigate those ships on the water, and engage in certain ship-to-ship interactions and ship-to-player interactions and ship-to-content interactions. Now, it won't be the expansive aspect of that, meaning all ships won't be present, all types of those ships, all attachments of those ships, right? And it will be maybe a little bit jank to start because it's going to be an alpha version of it. But the intent there is to provide the loop where players get to go and interact with content in the ocean. That won't be at the start of Alpha 2, but it will be in Alpha 2.
Yeah, as we talk about adding stuff, how long do you have an idea? This might be a question I shouldn't ask, but do you have an idea how long Alpha 2 might be? Because we are going to see things come online, but
as long as it needs to be.
Yeah, that's what I assume.
All right. That is something, though, that I get this feeling you were saying about archetypes that are going to be available at the start, but it sounds like this alpha is really something where you want it to maybe not get all the way up to like the start of where beta 1 would be, like functionally and content wise, but how much of like the systems and everything do you plan to bring online during Alpha 2? Do you plan to just like get most of the way during that period?
Alpha 2 is intended to provide all of the core functionality and systems at some point during Alpha 2 will be rolled out to be tested. And then between Alpha 2 and betas, we'll be refining those systems and populating those systems with the additional content necessary. That will then go through a more rigorous portion of testing, which is to kind of essentially QA all of that content through betas. So Alpha 2 is intended to be a true functional representation of all the core systems and features.
Awesome. So that's something I think people might want to take in consideration here, because what we've seen games call alphas or pre-alphas or other things, and the state of the game, and then you see the state of it when they call it beta, and then you see the state of it when they call it launch, and it's like, golly, this still feels like an alpha. I've seen that happen many a time.
And you can continue to say that until you're blue in the face and choking on the ground, grasping for air, and there will still be a large segment of the broad population that will never hear it. And that's okay, because it's not the responsibility of the players to be a good follower of development. They're the consumer, right? So they can have that opinion. That's totally fine. We need to be careful in how we present and market the game, and distinguishing between the audiences that are the less informed development consumer and the individuals who want to be part of the development process, watch that, give feedback, which is more our core audience, and just being able to differentiate between the two.
Yeah, like what you guys are really doing here, I'm going to give a funny phrase, do whatever you want, clip it or whatever, people. Make alpha again.
Make alpha again. Make alpha again. Ma!
Yes.
That's great.
So the last naval question I asked, this just popped in chat. I think it'll be brief. Will you be able to name your ship? So will we be able to sort of name and decorate in a way that people will know you're coming?
Okay. Absolutely.
And you can own more than one.
That was one of my favorite things. Yeah, you can own more than one. But that was one of my favorite things about another game I had played. I made sure whenever we had like naval runs with many ships, I mean, we would run 300 plus people on a particular, trade run or whatever with a lot of ships. I would have every ship named after a Star Trek ship. So I'd be like, all right, USS Endeavor, you take our flank, and Enterprise, move to the forward part. Like, that's just like total role play the shit out of it. And excuse me.
We curse all the time. It's fine. Yeah.
It's so good. I loved it.
We don't have a swear jar. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
You're muted, Diggs. I was waiting to have to say that to someone. I was glad it wasn't me.
Quick question is, can players just randomly kill non-combat NPCs in the world, like in World of Warcraft?
No. If they're a non-combat NPC, they're there to provide a particular service and or quest line. I don't feel it's any type of meaningful gameplay to provide the opportunity to kill those particular NPCs.
I guess a follow-up question for me would be, but they could they be killed during a siege? Could they be or like
so during sieges or during during sieges or during monster events, those vendors, the non-combat NPCs, are usually provided for through a particular building type. Now, unless they're general NPCs. If they're general NPCs, currently I think what we're doing is we're despawning them if they're not combat oriented. And if they are a service building like a constructible, if that building becomes damaged, then the NPC is disabled post the event or post the siege until the building is repaired. But they're not present to be killed as part of the siege event. If they are combat NPCs, such as a mercenary or like a captain of the guard or whatever, they're present, they can be killed, and they have ramifications for doing so.
So, like, I think in Alpha 1, we had like a scholar who was she wanted us to go on quests to gather more information about the wildlife. Would that character be able to be killed? And if so, would she pop back up later? So even after the siege, if she comes back, and then would we have to? Let's say that the node is destroyed. Would it have to come back as the same racial type in order to get that NPC back?
Oh, to get the NPC back. It depends. So depending on the cultural influence of the node, activates certain types of quest lines and or spawners, right? Some of those are shared. Some of those are general. Some of those relate to a progression path that is a first-time user experience. Those will be constant across all culture types. Some of them, however, are predicates that spawn when certain story arcs and or events or commissions or buy orders become present within the node, and those might change based on the cultural influence of the node. So there is a separation between those populations.
Someone's asking about ruins after the node is destroyed and how that would affect quest lines.
Yeah, so ruin. Are you referring to the ruined kind of the battle arena that the node's footprint has after the destruction of it through the siege system?
I'm guessing, yeah.
Okay.
That's the only kind of ruins I can think about.
Have I talked about that in the past? I think maybe I did.
I think you've mentioned that those would kind of be there, but I don't think we have.
Yeah, so those are kind of like open world battlegrounds that spawn on the footprint of the node after a successful siege. And these are opportunities that previous defenders have to salvage certain materials and or equipment from the destroyed node, or that attackers have to do the same. And there's interact points that live within that environment that take time in order to interact with, which makes those individuals susceptible to potential ganking or fighting. And you can control those areas. And that exists for some period of time. It's like an open world arena system.
Gotcha.
Okay. Maybe I can jump in. You can, one of you guys want to jump in before this, but
go ahead.
Related kind of is, what's your current vision for player created NPCs like the caravan guards, the arena heroes, the freehold helpers, shop merchants? Do you still have plans for that? player created NPCs like the mercenaries.
Oh, player created. Got it.
Yeah, player created.
Yeah, those are those are specific types of NPCs that have specific functions, right? And for example, on the freehold, we've always talked about in the past having certain NPCs that are capable of rotating crops or planting and or watering, doing certain process-oriented functions that are available to the user to acquire. We still have those plans. Those plans will follow a similar like pet system functionality, core system functionality, where they'll have actions that can be dictated by the user.
All right, thank you.
So there was one that I probably should have put on the list, but you can just say no if it's. I don't think it's too dangerous. Can you tell me a little bit more about like the versatility and viability of gear? Like, would a paladin really be wearing robes and going in with like a staff or more magic oriented instead of thumping oriented stuff? Or is that not really sort of thing that would ever happen? Is it that everybody can wear all of the equipment, but people are still usually going to wear certain types for certain reasons?
So the intent behind the equipment system is that you will have certain types of equipment that are more relevant against the certain type of content that you're attempting to defeat or to succeed at. And what that means is, especially on the defensive side of things, you will want to have different gear sets acquired to be most effective against those particular encounters. On the weapon side of things, weapons have different types of interactions. They have passive stat progression that's available through the weapon type. That's going to be relevant based on the way you're kitting your character in concert with your ability selection as well through the skill tree, on how you're attempting to emphasize your character's waterfall stats. And there's different viable approaches that each class has, right? We're of course adopting a Trinity type system with a hybridization model. So you can flirt the line between the roles to a degree based on player customization. And a agnostic equipment approach allows players to emphasize that hybridization model to a degree. So there's still going to be a spectrum of relevant equipment that's most effective for your character based on the role you're attempting to provide a particular party or yourself solo, and players will do well to kind of stay within that spectrum. But it is something that is intended to be somewhat agnostic of class.
So it's the sort of thing where it might be, we're going to a dungeon that's all fire golems. So if everybody straps up with plate armor and fire resistance, you don't have to worry about the magic fire. You've got the fire resistance for that. And when you start getting punched around, that's why everyone's coming with plate. Yeah, some of your other stats might be a little diminished. Dig it. We're going to have that much more defense, so we'll be able to stick around a lot longer.
Yeah, the idea is that the Encounters design team presents a particular type of challenge rating. For those who are familiar with playing D&D or whatever, challenge rating gets informed by a few different vertical power levels, but then there's also the horizontal perspective. That is, what tools does your party have to address the challenge rating of the situation? And some of the horizontal progression exists within how you kit your equipment slots. Some of those can be enhancements through stones, as you're discussing with fire resistance. Some of those are base stats that exist on a particular item, such as physical damage mitigation versus magical damage mitigation, and what subtype of damage is incoming based on that. These are the ways that kind of we emphasize that more rock, paper, scissors type of interaction with balance, to where it's okay to have asymmetric imbalance if there are horizontal methods by which you achieve the challenge rating.
Gotcha. And I would say it's not just plate, because you could have rings, you could have jewelry, you could have your passive skills as well.
All of those contribute, absolutely. And they're all part of designing a more player-centric customization aspect to create, I think, what's the most fun part about those systems, unique, weird ways that you overcome things that the norm or the meta hasn't done, right? And then feeling real satisfactory when someone's like, what the hell kind of a build is that? that. It's awesome for this dungeon, but it sucks ass for this one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, that's what I could see is just like an entire alliance that's the Leather Bros. It's like, oh yeah, we only always ever use medium armor. We have medium armor specialized for all sorts of things. Everybody's put all of their points in medium armor. So, we can go into any situation and we just put on the right medium armor, we're good to go. That could be a very interesting angle to see, is just straddle the line, sit in the middle, and be ready for everything. So that's something I'm interested to see.
That's why I tell people that in Ashes, there should not be an objective meta that is for every tank or for every mage. This is the most efficient tactics possible.
Right. Well, the way I kind of see that is you have this idea of the macro meta, and then you have the micro meta. And what we're doing with this approach is we're de-emphasizing a macro meta and instead emphasizing a micro meta. And the difference between the macro micro is that on the micro level, you have metas that might form based on each individual type of encounter or experience, right? And in those senses, yes, there's going to be a most optimal, there's going to be a best in slot, there's going to be whatever that pertains to that particular challenge rating. But there will not be an overarching meta that says from a macro level, hey, if you got this shit, you're good to go with everything, right? Yeah. That's boring, that's unfulfilling, that is not interesting, and it is just something that dumbifies the experience.
Yeah. More importantly, why don't you have blah, 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 blah in your build? You're supposed to have this.
Exactly.
Yeah, that definitely ruins the ability to form a party if, you have to be a certain thing with a this and a that and the other. Otherwise, you suck. And what are you even doing here, you noob? I like to see that there's going to be that level of variance and variation. And, honestly, that is something I do like with the tabletop games, the idea that, like 5th edition of D&D, for example, if you wanted, you could roll your human variant level 1 wizard, roll up some light armor mastery, then get yourself some medium armor going, and by level 8, you're out there wearing plate. It's like, yeah, that's right. I didn't use strength as a dump stat. I got 16 strength. I can wear this plate armor out here in the wild. I don't need to wear my mage armor no more. That you can do it.
That's one of the reasons why I really love D&D 3.5, or particularly D&D Paizo's Pathfinder as an extension of D&D 3.5, is because of the very high degree of granularity that you have in customizing your character. I feel systems, and this might be a hot take for a lot of players, because I know it's more widely adopted and more easier to get into from a new player experience perspective, is D&D 5th edition. I never really got into 5th edition because I felt they oversimplified a lot of those choices and decisions. And I enjoyed the more intricate nature of what Pathfinder or 3.5 provided in character customization options, and that high spectrum of horizontal progression that addressed unique situations and challenge ratings that Pathfinder had. But some people felt that was too granular, right? And it was a barrier to entry because of the high degree of granularity. I personally just love that more intricate detail aspect. I can't believe we've been talking for almost 2 hours.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I keep telling everyone to quit mentioning this in chat. You're over. Stop. Shut up. Why are you bringing it up?
Honestly, we could have an entire 2-hour conversation just on tabletop games.
I know.
There are some. Real quick, I think these can be very.
I want to get one quickie one. I've seen it asked a few times about anti-cheat and stuff. Nobody ever tells what their security is, because then you're telling everyone what to look out for. Don't ask. You don't want the answer. You don't want them to reveal the answer. They've got things. They've got people. If that doesn't work, they can hire other people. Security is going to be handled. Don't worry about it.
Well, and I think we could expand on that a little bit more. I mean, security is always at the top of any concern when you have a closed system like an MMO is, right? You don't have an opportunity We've seen a lot of MMOs launch without security in place, and the economy gets ruined as a result thereafter. And every band-aid that's slapped on top of that wound is just making things worse. And so part of why you take the time in order to ensure that things are done correctly is also the security component of things. And that's where testing with a live audience is a bit different also than testing with a Q&A audience as well, because you're going to get those bad actors, and we call them bad actors because ultimately they're attempting to destroy the fun for others. And that's not the reason why people spend years of their lives developing these games. They want to see the satisfaction, the smile, the happiness that this effort brings to people who they love that are part of the genre they also love, right? So what we've done is we've hired some security experts who've worked on massive other MMOs like World of Warcraft and other games, and they bring with them a lot of experience, and we're going to be testing that in leading up towards Alpha 2. It's a very important part of Alpha 2. It's not something that we really addressed with Alpha 1 because, again, that was a much more bare bones kind of functional testing experience. We did see some issues during Alpha 1, and we made it important for Alpha 2 to test those systems. We have a broad spectrum of approaches that we're going to be utilizing in order to try to protect the integrity of the game once it launches.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping that the stuff coming with all the other amazing things Unreal 5 brings is also additional tools to streamline and make really nice security systems that are low impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we got probably time for what? Another maybe a couple more questions?
Yeah. I have a quick question from chat about when we might see a preview of the Augment system. This year, next year? What are you thinking?
That's a good question. I do not know when that is scheduled for off the top of my head. But I
didn't think you did.
On that. Yeah.
Okay.
The character creator. That's another common question is sort of when can we expect to see that again, or when hands-on, that sort of stuff.
Character creator is scheduled before the start of Alpha 2. So players will have an opportunity to see the character creator in the start of Alpha 2's client that they'll have access to. It's something that I believe last milestone, or maybe it's this milestone, was getting revamped or retouched up.
And then there was a debate in chat. I think it was about gear breaking if it's over-enchanted. I guess the Wikipedia is kind of conflicting on whether it breaks permanently, temporarily.
It depends on when you're doing the over-enchanting. So it's a progressive tier of risk. At lower levels, you have opportunities to potentially lose out on the pluses instead of breaking the equipment. But when you reach a certain threshold thereafter, there is an opportunity to essentially destroy the equipment where you get resources back. But that's a risk that the player takes.
Yep. In all sorts of games.
And then my absolutely final question, and I'll leave it to y'all, is apartments. So when I think we know there's 50, I believe, to start with at a third stage node. So when we get to Metropolis, is there any rough idea of how many apartments you think might be sort of available maximally? I know there's some expansion possibilities between depending on who owns it, what they want to do, but
yeah. So basically, apartments are default structures that exist in every node type. And at the different stages, you have upgrade paths that those apartment buildings can take based on projects that the mayor and the node initiate together. Those upgrade paths increase the quantity and the types of apartments that can be essentially purchased or rented, meaning that you can have larger, higher tier apartment types if you unlock those upgrade paths, which then have greater allotment of functional furniture placement within the apartment that players then have access to. The quantity of apartments is obviously not a firm number. This is something we're going to be play testing. This is something that needs to be balanced. But to start, what we're thinking around is the low hundreds, not 100. The low hundreds will be at the Metropolis level for players to spec into with the expansion, with the upgrade trees.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
I have a kind of quick question. Do you plan to have guild management available at the start of Alpha 2?
Yes, there will be guild management functions available at the start of Alpha 2.
That's what I thought. That was Vulcan from the forums, by the way. Okie dokie.
All right. One more here. It's kind of an open one. I'm going to maybe modify it a little bit.
All right.
Is there anything that you haven't gotten a chance to say in this stream, on a live stream recently? Anything you wanted to clarify that you haven't? Anything that anything that you feel like the community doesn't understand, but maybe needs a little bit more direction on, or anything like that? Kind of, this is like an open floor sort of thing here. Is there anything that you'd want to make sure the community knows that, maybe they don't know or isn't quite as clear and concrete to them right now?
It's a good
Ashes
question.
is not designed for everyone.
I mean, that is a true statement, and I think that everyone should want that to be the truth. Anytime, and I've said this in the past, I like the lead digs, by the way. Every time that I've said this in the past, anybody trying to create a product for everyone is going to fail every time. And the bottom line is that everybody's different. Everyone has different interests. Everything is different from what you're trying to achieve out of a system or what you're trying to achieve out of a game. And that's okay. That's a good thing. That's a very good thing. I don't know. I'm relatively verbose when it comes to talking, but I do it all day, every day, every hour of every day in some conference room or another at the studio. So I obviously have a lot to say about certain things. What I would say to the community at large is that there is nothing more rewarding than being able to interact with you guys and being able to kind of have you along the way of this journey. And it is quite a journey. I can't believe how much of a journey it has been thus far and how much a journey still remains. But it is very rewarding, very motivating to see the excitement and how much the systems in the game resonate with our core community. And I just offer the same thanks that I give as much as I can, from not just myself, but from the team that's behind Ashes of Creation. Our ultimate goal is to create a product that we enjoy and that you guys enjoy. So you guys tuning in and watching Q&As like this, or watching our monthly live streams and going and commenting on social platforms and on our forums, and being registered for the game, like all of that stuff contributes to us being motivated every day we go to work. And I can't thank you guys enough for that. With that being said, remember that everything we discuss, everything that we're working on, everything that we're showing is subject to change in an effort to form a more perfect game. And by perfect, I don't mean literally perfect. I mean, how can we iterate on the designs and the approach of Ashes of Creation so that we fulfill the promise of our goals, the promise of our philosophy in the game design, and the pillars that we expressed when we started this journey. That is the ultimate end goal. And the type of interaction that we have and the rapport that we built with the community, our core audience, is in an effort to do that better. And so just keep it with a grain of salt. These designs, they're intended to be tested. They're intended to be iterated upon. And when you hear, individuals rising up in arms against a particular design decision, know that at the heart of this project and at the heart of this development are fellow MMO gamers. And we are not going to do this product wrong by making simplistic mistakes that fundamentally alter what the intent of the design and the approach of the game is. So have some trust in us that we're going to be iterating upon your guys' feedback and the playtesting that we do in an effort to create the game that we want to make.
Cool.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Well, I think with that, we are at the end, and that is wonderful. We have greatly appreciated the last 6 years, getting to talk to you, not just here, but forums and Discord. And I have to say, it's been very nice having such an open person. As you say, you tend to speak in volumes. So I think that's a very good thing for the community, is being able to hear the why things are happening. I think that does help calm people. So we appreciate you being here, and everyone else that has joined us.
I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate fellow content creators like you guys that are out there covering the product and being able to bring to the masses kind of your thoughts and perspectives. You guys always have a great time. I see it when I watch you guys discussing with each other. You're true gamers at heart. You know this genre because you played in this genre for so long. So really appreciate what you guys do. Happy 100th episode. Congratulations from the studio to you guys and participating in this conversation journey for so long. We do appreciate it. You guys are awesome. And I'm happy to be here. I love being here.
Well,
yay.
We hope to obviously have you on for a fourth time, maybe sometime around Alpha 2. We'll see.
Yay!
Well, everyone, those of you who are new to us, just a little quick plug. We are usually live every Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. So we are usually a little bit later than now, but you can find us in our Discord as well. And if we didn't get your question, sorry. There's a lot this is a massive game, and there's a lot to talk about. So thank you all, and we will see you around for those who join us next Sunday. And again, thank you very much, Steven, for your time.
Absolutely. Bye, guys.
Hey there, everybody.